So I'm going to talk about dark matter and its role in our universe. Okay, here's sort of my outline. I'm going to be talking about two sort of theories that scientists have, a particle solution and a physics-based solution. So I'm going to talk about my personal connection first. So ever since I was little, I love looking at the stars, planets, learning about constellations. So when I figured out I could turn it into a career, so why not? And then in high school, I grew fond of physics, so why not combine the two? And then I got the opportunity to do Capstone this year, and no classes really offer the in-depth astrophysics that I want to learn, so I did it myself. So my research project process looked like I had to entirely base it off literature review because I couldn't conduct any experiments or do any surveys by myself, so yeah. So my research question is, why is dark matter created in our universe? But first, what even is dark matter? How do scientists know about it? So, scientists know about dark matter because when they look at galaxies, we can see that outer objects on it are moving at such high velocities that they should be flung off into space. But something's keeping them in, and that's just a whole bunch of gravity. But these galaxies don't have enough mass to have that much gravitational force, so there has to be some unseen mass that is doing that. Also, scientists use gravitational lensing, which is in this photo right here. Basically, we can observe objects that are behind other objects because the closer object warps the light, and we see two different pictures of it, and we can kind of estimate how much gravity based on how much warping it does. So, I'm going to talk about particle solutions first. So, first we have WIMPs, SIMPs, and primordial black holes. WIMPs are weakly interactive massive particles that were made in the early universe that don't interact via electromagnetic force. They are very small, undetectable, good candidates. Next we have SIMPs, strongly interacting massive particles, similar to WIMPs, but they interact strongly within themselves and not via nuclear forces. Primordial black holes are similar to black holes. They were created in the early universe. They have the same ratio of weight, so they're microscopic, but they hold a lot of density. So, yeah, these are first two candidates. Next we have axions. Axions are basically particles that transform into photons when in the presence of an electromagnetic field. They were first introduced as a solution to the strong CP problem in quantum dynamics. They weakly interact with ordinary matter, and an axion's mass inversely correlates with its effect on the universe's total matter density. So lighter axions would be prevalent. Axions are said to be formed in the early universe through a misalignment mechanism when particles' field initial value is not near to or exactly zero, causing the field to oscillate, giving off energy that decays into other particles. So, axions are compatible with galaxies, galactic clusters, gravitational lensing. They're really good candidates for dark matter. Next we have sterile neutrinos. So we know about neutrinos in the standard model. That would be muons, tau neutrinos, and electrons. But these are considered to be hot dark matter. So that means they have very high velocities, which dark matter doesn't. Dark matter is cold. So sterile neutrinos were said to be formed when standard neutrinos are put in the presence of primordial plasma. They do not interact via nuclear force, making them undetectable. So next we have Planck relics. Planck relics are remnants of evaporated black holes. They're infinitely small with an infinite amount of density. When black holes get down to Planck size, which is the smallest measurement that scientists know of, they reach a stable equilibrium, which means quantum gravitational effects don't matter anymore, they stopped. Some theoretical models suggest that these may be charged, which means we could kind of detect them through electromagnetic interactions. So, particles would be the most ideal solution for dark matter, and they form massive halo objects around the galaxy, so they're not embedded in a galaxy. They form around it to kind of keep all these objects in. And dark matter is around 85% of all matter in our universe, so that's a big chunk. And these particles would greatly advance our knowledge. Okay, now, modified physics. So to kind of get a background, we're going to talk about the start of the universe. Lambda CDM. Lambda represents the constant of dark energy, which accounts for the accelerated expansion of the universe. This model successfully addresses the cosmic microwave background, and that basically states that the initial density fluctuations that give rise to universe's large-scale features. So the start of the universe, when all this Big Bang was happening, anything could have been made, we don't know. But we're talking about astrophysics, so we need to learn about general relativity. So, general relativity states that the amount of mass an object has directly determines the gravitational effect it has, along with distance between objects and relative size. So, like a larger object with more mass would pull a smaller object towards it. General relativity predicts points of singularities, points of infinite density within, at the center of black holes and the universe's origin. So, modified physics is using modifying general relativity to account for dark matter and making sense of the gravity. So, modified Newtonian dynamics suggests that Newton's laws of motion for gravity may not hold in low acceleration regimes. Typical Newtonian dynamics suggests that the further an object is away from the center of a galaxy, the less gravitational force it would feel. But Mond modifies this. Although Mond's main focus is gravitational lensing. Next we have A-qual. This is an equation that aims to conserve momentum and energy successfully, so that outer objects wouldn't be using as much energy as predicted. This equation alters the traditional link between mass density and gravitational potential. This one also, its main focus is gravitational lensing. Next we have TVES, tensor vector scalar gravity. It's another version of Mond. It uses three dynamic fields to modify gravity, the tensor vector and scalar. Contrasting Mond, though, it obeys conservation laws and explains galactic rotation in a non-relativistic way. Although this theory to scientists seems more sound, it's not really, it's unlikely. So, if any of these physics were to be true, scientists would have to disregard the methods they've been using for the past century. And it's just really not ideal. So what we want to do is find a particle solution. So we have ongoing research to do so. Direct detection experiments are experiments in underground labs that attempt to see infrequent interactions between atomic nuclei and dark matter particles. So there are these detectors that try to record microscopic energy deposits from their decay, and these would come out in the form of cosmic rays and radioactivity. Indirect detection is when scientists try to observe points in space that are predicted to have a high density of dark matter, and they look for annihilation of byproducts and decay, but dark matter doesn't really have a life cycle as far as we know. It started at the beginning of our universe, and we haven't been able to see any sort of decay since then. And then accelerator searches try to create dark matter particles in high energy collisions, trying to sort of simulate the Big Bang start of the universe. And the absence of traverse energy and momentum imbalances in the collision debris suggest presence of dark matter. So, but these experiments, these underground labs, are few and far between. They're exclusive. There's not very many of them. So, research moves slow in dark matter. But hopefully, soon in my lifetime, we will find a particle solution that maybe we can use here on Earth for the unimaginable. Thank you. Questions? Yes?
What's your favorite planet?
My favorite planet is Neptune, because it's blue and my cat's named Neptune. Yes?
How will learning more about dark matter help us here on Earth?
Okay, I think dark matter would help us here on Earth because it's just like an unimaginable particle. Like, we don't have any idea what this could be. If we find one of these particles, there's really no saying how much we could do with it. We could create things. I mean, obviously these are created in high energy collisions, so maybe we could do something with that. Or they're also, like, as I said, they don't have a lifespan, so that could be really important. Mr. James?
At one point you said that dark matter comprises 85% of the mass in the galaxy, or the universe. How is that sort of come up with? Do you have any idea? Through what you were doing, did you have any idea? Or
I also know that dark energy takes up 69% of all energy in our galaxy, and dark matter is only 26% of that. So there's a whole other area that I didn't talk about, but I'm assuming that it's so massive and it just takes up so much gravity. Yeah. Dr. Zafar?
Why do you think that so many writers have been compelled by dark matter, dark energy, black holes, and they've created these time travel stories? What is it about our non-understanding that allows for that sort of gap? I mean, have you found that that's true? That or was there any mention in the research about how this compels the imagination?
Yeah, I think there's so much we don't know about space. You can really make any story true, and like obviously these stories are fact checked and everything, but it's really interesting. Like, even when I was researching, my imagination like ran wild. Like, how do they sort of know all this? I didn't really get into that, but maybe one day we can go out there and find what it is. So.
Thank you.
No more questions? Ms. Locke?
Allie, do you plan to continue studying this or related topics when you go out to university next year?
Yes, I'll be studying astrophysics in California next year.
Super cool.
Okay, thank you. Oh,
I could do one more. You presented a lot of sort of walking through a lot of theories about. Is there anyone that you sort of lean to or lean towards based on all of your research that you think has more of a chance of being successful?
Personally, I really like the axion theory because it's more than just dark matter. It kind of coincides with quantum mechanics and photons, and it's compatible with, like I said, galactic clusters and galaxies and multiple. It's really like universal. Why?
What was your favorite thing that you learned about everything?
Mm. Probably that dark matter doesn't have a lifespan. That's really interesting to me. Like, it doesn't really decay, and that's why it's so indestructible. Any more questions? No? Thank you.
If you'd like to take a break and get some more snacks, feel free, but we're going to start the company in a few moments.
interventions in schools. Before I do that, I would like to thank some people. I'd like to thank Dr. Zakara and Ms. Koch for their support. I'd like to thank Mr. Chanis for letting me use his room day and night to write my paper. I'd like to thank my parents for their support, even though I know I stressed them out and maybe confused them a couple times. I'd like to thank Mr. Miller for helping me actually complete this project. And lastly, I'd like to thank Oliver not only for doing all of the tech stuff tonight and last night, but also for hearing this presentation about 10 times this week, that he could probably give it himself. So first I'd like to start by talking about my personal interest in psychology. And while this isn't necessarily a psychology-based capstone project, that's where I initially started. So these are all books that I've read. They're all in my room right now. And most of them are about World War II historical fiction. The other half are about children in other fascist countries. And I got really into this genre when I was like 10 years old. And I didn't know why. I was just really intrigued by it. And then later, I put the pieces together and realized I was just really intrigued by how these governments, what were their ideals, how did they justify treating people the way they did, and, creating the systems that they did, and discovered, that was all. I was really interested in human psychology. So to go into my capstone process, it was a bit unique from my peers. The capstone process starts in May of your junior year, and you pick a topic, and it gets approved. And over the fall, you do your research, and I tried to do that, but my original topic was incredibly difficult, and I didn't have any mentors, and I had a really hard time doing that. So in December, Mr. Miller helped me come up with the topic that I have today, and while it's not necessarily what I originally wanted to do, it ended up being really interesting, and I'm happy that I can share it with you today. So this is my outline. I'll begin by talking about early intervention practices. They started after World War I in about 1920, and they were really not great. They noticed that students were having issues and misbehaving, but they just told female teachers to use their maternal instincts and kind of figure it out. And later in the 1960s, they developed programs for students with special educational needs and disabilities, and that was a little bit better and still not great. And so today, they have more intensive interventions, more data-driven interventions, and I'll get into that. So what is an intervention? Intervention is a broad term, and it is used to describe anything, anything to mitigate any sort of problem. So specifically with behavioral interventions or interventions in schools, it is used to address behavioral issues and any academic gaps that a student might be facing. So there are a couple key components to interventions. The biggest one is that they need to be personalized to the individual student. Each student struggles with their own thing, academically or behaviorally, and if they aren't individualized, they won't target what the student needs. They need to be engaged, they need to be interesting to the student. If the student's not engaged, it won't do anything. They need to connect to a wider learning, so if a student is struggling with a specific academic subject, it needs to connect to what they're learning in class. Communication is key. Not only communication between the interventionist and the teacher, but also with the student and their parents to make sure everyone understands what's going on, how is this going to best support the student. And lastly, identifying the root cause of behaviors. Behaviors come from somewhere, and if you can understand where they come from, it's easier to help kind of mitigate these issues. So how do we identify behavior? I'm going to talk a lot about disruptive behaviors, and this is any behavior that interferes with the classroom environment or a specific student's learning. So these are a list of behaviors that are disruptive to the classroom, talking out of turn, disrespecting property, stuff like that. And these are more silent behaviors, known as withdrawn behaviors, that affect a single student. So a lot of the times it's related to mental health issues. And so these are kind of the connection or this is what might cause a behavior. So from the time you're born to the time you're about 8 years old, you're learning essential skills, and children do this by copying what they see, what they hear. And so my project was really focused on children, elementary age children, so about 5 to 12-ish. And so that's when they get to school, that's when they're learning how to be people, and that's when you see an emergence in these behaviors. Oftentimes behaviors stem from outside of school, again, a learned environment. And oftentimes behaviors are an expression of a need that a student is unable to express verbally. So what is the connection between the behaviors I identified and kind of these risk factors? So I'm going to talk about 3 different examples. So, for example, aggressive behavior, such as like physical or verbal threats, is often stemmed from an abusive or chaotic home environment. So a student will either feel powerless in their home and find that they can exert their power over their peers, and that makes them feel a little bit better about what's going on at home. Or they kind of internalize these abusive behaviors and again exert their power over their peers. Attention-seeking behaviors such as hyperactivity, like use of inappropriate language just to get people's attention and kind of get the teacher going, can stem from too little or too much attention that the child continues to seek outside of the home and in school. And lastly, withdrawn behaviors such as self-isolation, poor social skills, these can be a sign of a bunch of things such as abuse in the home, struggle with mental health, and signs of special needs. So how do we assess behavior? There are a ton of different ways to assess behavior. And the biggest thing is that you need to contextualize the behavior. Identifying the behavior is fine, but if you don't understand why it's happening and what is causing the student to act in this way, then you can't form an intervention to help them with that issue. So these are 2 less intensive behavioral interventions that are kind of used as needed on the daily. So an ABC chart, so A stands for antecedent, B stands for behavior, and C stands for consequence. So what happens directly before the behavior occurs? What is the behavior? What's the severity? How frequently does it occur? And lastly, how does the adult respond? How do they punish the student? And then this one over here is known as the check-in, check-out method. So if a student is identified with repeated patterns of behavioral issues, but not to the level of some more intensive interventions, they will check in with the teacher at the beginning of the day, they will set goals, and then at the end of the day, they'll check out with that adult, they'll talk about if they met the goal or not, ways the student can improve, and like positive things that the student did. These are some more intensive behaviors used when, the repeated pattern becomes a problem. Functional behavioral assessments are very frequent, and I'll talk about those later. So are individual education programs, also IEPs, I'm sure a lot of you have heard of those. My personal favorite, not favorite, but the one I found most interesting was the behavioral assessment system for children, or BASC-3. That one was really cool to me because it's a data-driven program, and you can input the data set that you've collected from the child, and it can pick up on more subtle behaviors that might be harder to detect, such as like anxiety or depression. And so I thought that one was really cool. And again, big on the, I forgot the word. But the assessment scales for children and adolescents puts the behaviors in context. So it's like 30 different behaviors and 150 different school or classroom situations that can help pinpoint like root causes and stuff like that. And then same with the home edition. It's just a list of behaviors and at-home situations. So right now, positive behavior intervention support is a big thing, and it's focused on positive reinforcement. It is a tiered support system. So this first tier is known as the universal tier, and it's used to help, or it's used on a classroom level, and it works for about 80 to 85% of students. And again, it focuses on positive reinforcement. This second tier is a more targeted tier for those who are unresponsive to the first. It works for about 10 to 15% of students. And this can be like group interventions, students struggling with similar issues such as like social skills and interactions. And this last tier is the intensive tier, and it works for about 3 to 5% of students, and that is when you implement other things such as FBAs to help further determine the root cause of the problem and how best to help the student with that. And I'd like to point out that the PBIS system that's most often used is not, it contextualizes the behavior, but it's not culturally responsive, so they have a culturally responsive PBIS, which just puts into context what is a child's background, where are they from, you know, like city or rural, what's their home life, is religion a factor, to help further identify, is there something else that might cause these behaviors. So I talked a lot about, I introduced the topic, and so why do we care? I'm going to share a lot of statistics on the screen, and I'd just like to preface by saying that not all of these are caused by lack of interventions in schools, but they are a point to be worried about. So I'd like to point out that in like a 2019 study, 79% of adults were proficient in a reading level, and that sounds okay, but that just means they were reading at a 6th grade level, they can make low-level inferences, they could compare and contrast. Nothing like what you'd expect from an adult. These are statistics about mental health and substance abuse after COVID-19, and there was a huge increase after the pandemic, with these issues. And lastly, these are statistics about COVID-19 and their impact on education and students' learning. Most schools lost about a year and a half of learning, if not more, and students have yet to recover fully after the pandemic. So there's a huge push for intervention right now to help fill these educational gaps that students are experiencing. So what are the outcomes of intervention? Do they actually work? Unfortunately, I can't pinpoint to a data set because these interventions are individualized. They're different for each student and they work on different levels for each student, but they are proven to increase, positive behavior and social skills and interactions. They are able to fill in these educational gaps. They do work and are not bad for your children if they need them. So how can teachers help? And while teachers are like a good first line of defense, sometimes behaviors are escalated and there needs to be more intensive approach. But what can teachers do until that point? So there's a ton of de-escalation tactics, and these first 3 are mainly just to remind the student that they're in class and they should be paying attention. Again, positive reinforcement, like that universal tier that I was talking about with the PBIS system. And other methods that can be used, so restorative justice, a kid acts out, you make sure their consequence is relevant to what they did, realistic, you're not asking them to spend crazy amounts of time doing some sort of punishment that is kind of unrelated to what they did wrong in the first place, and to make sure that a teacher is being respectful when they speak to the student. On earlier slides, I kind of had bullet points about, reputation and patterns and negative behaviors, and that's kind of where this comes into play. If you're speaking down to a student, telling them they're always bad and they always do this and they always do that, then they begin to internalize that, and that's who I am as a person, and that's how they'll continue to act. So being respectful to them is incredibly important in helping them improve their behavioral issues. Just fostering a supportive classroom environment is important, and for students with withdrawn behaviors, an increase in social emotional learning, so like encouraging
expression and like reading books about like big feelings can help a child like really like understand themselves and be able to open up and speak about it. So I conducted an interview. I didn't have a lot of time, so it's a very small sample. But I conducted an interview with the Winona Northeast Supervisory Union, which is our local school district. I interviewed 3 staff members from Student Services and Student and Family Services. I asked them 9 questions, one of them being general questions about the district and class size and student size. So there are 6 schools in the district, a high school, a middle school, and 4 elementary schools. Within roughly those 4 elementary schools, there are 554 students ages 5 through 12. And when I asked about class size, they gave me a huge range, about 3 to 20 students, because it really does depend. So all of these questions are directly related to everything I can just explain. So how are students identified for interventions? So again, that communication piece, they talk like internal schools teams discuss, they discuss with parents, and they implement the multi-tiered support system. So if something is not working, then they kind of like move to the different tiers and they pay attention. What percentage of students work with interventionists within this age range? So approximately 55 to 84 of those students work with interventionists. Is there any quantifiable data on the outcomes of interventions? Like I said, there's not like a specific chart that they could necessarily give me, but something that they use to track their students' data is goal tracking sheets, kind of like the check-in, check-out method. They use a program called Panorama, which is just a data collection program, similar to the goal tracking sheets, just online. And lastly, School-Wide Information System, or SWIS, and they can input all of this data into there, and it can help them make informed practices, or informed, like data-driven decisions to best help students in their intervention programs. With the understanding that each student may have a different interventionist plan, how is a standard intervention structured? So again, depending on the type of support the student needs. So they use the check-in, check-out method, IEPs, the universal tier in classrooms, and just overall positive reinforcement. For group interventions, how large are they? What time of day do they occur? Do students miss class? So they try not to have group interventions unless a student or a group of students is struggling with a similar issue. If they do have group interventions, very small, about 2 to 3 students in size, and it works on something that all of them are struggling with, such as social skills or different academic subjects. So does the WNS school district implement the PBIS system or similar programs? So this is a quote from them. Yes, but the type of PBIS system is not consistent from school to school. So as I said, there's 4 elementary schools. 2 out of those 4 elementary schools use the PBIS system, and the other 2, as well as the middle school, it uses what is known as a behavior matrix, and I can't remember what that is off the top of my head, but it is a similar data point system. What is the funding allocated for interventions within the district? So they get federal grants, local funding, state funding, which is often used for interventions and PBIS. Also social emotional intervention, general funding is allocated for that, and that's used in the largest of the elementary schools. How are teachers in the district involved in interventions, and how are they trained to approach different classroom situations based on a student's behavior? So again, they have frequent meetings, they call it kid talks, to discuss, any patterns that they're seeing or improvements that they're seeing in students. And they also provide several opportunities for teachers and support staff, such as, verbal de-escalation training, responsive classroom training, and trauma-informed classroom practices to better help their teachers understand their students within the classroom. Lastly, I asked them why they believed interventions in schools were important and how they could help mitigate problems within the classroom. Again, another quote, we want to have a proactive approach to help mitigate problems, and they do this through kind of all of the methods I just mentioned, like goal setting, the check-in, check-out method, classroom level intervention, and providing students with, another quote, skills to address specific challenges and skill deficits, which just overall improves the students going forward. So my final discussion, kind of what does this all mean? So recently, our administration has decided to dismantle the Department of Education, meaning a lot of funding is being taken away from schools, which is incredibly important. So in the 2021-2020 school year, 11.6% of federal funds went to Vermont public schools. I'm not sure what that equates to in dollars, but I know it's about $3,000 per student, which is about 13% higher than the national average. Vermont is like 6th in education, which kind of points to like when you fund things, they improve, and we need interventions right now, and we need to fund those. So these are some more statistics. As I previously mentioned, funding is kind of being removed. There is a teacher shortage, and a lot of teachers are resigning due to the added stress. A study was conducted that said about teachers worked about 54 or more hours during the week because of these shortages. There's also been an increase in mental health issues since COVID-19, and COVID-19 had a negative impact on education. A lot of students need support, and without the proper staffing for that, students are acting out more because they want the attention from their teachers, and the teachers are simply unable to give it. There's about 25 to 30 kids per one adult, and that's just inadequate to give each student what they need. So that is my capstone presentation. Thank you for listening. Questions? Dad?
So, you talked a lot about the correlation or the increase of disruptive behavior from COVID-19. The other thing that was introduced in our society at that time was TikTok. Is there a correlation between the use of social media in school-age children and disruptive behavior?
That's a good question. I didn't look into that, but just from basic understanding, I'm pretty sure that's a yes, because it kind of, like, one of the things a lot of students struggle with is social interaction, and the use of social media kind of puts a wall between you and another person because you don't have to interact face to face, and it kind of, social media is a sounding board, and, you know, if someone has a certain belief, then that's just what they're going to get back, and that's just increasing, it's just kind of justifying the behaviors that a student's exhibiting. And again, what I was talking about with children just absorbing information and kind of copying that, that's very prevalent in, like, if a parent is not monitoring kind of what their child is doing online, or like video games they play, like specifically with like violent behaviors. There's a lot of violent content out there that parents don't monitor, and again, the student could be copying that and thinking that's okay, and being reinforced by the sounding board that social media provides. Sydney.
I have a question about like during COVID. Like, do you know if like there was an intervention program that was like over Zoom? Like, was that something that was continued, or was that just like completely dismantled and like lost within like the change from like in-person school to virtual school?
Again, that's not something I really looked into. Yeah, I can't really answer that one. Like I can't make any assertion about that. Maya?
So you mentioned the cutting of the Department of Education. Did you look into anything on, like, if, I mean, there's a good chance that our funding will be cut for stuff like that. Did you look into, like, finding
again, another thing I didn't really have time to look into because it was kind of nearing the capstone deadline, but I do know that a lot of, like Vermont, again, is very like progressive and they do their best to kind of establish these. And I know that a lot of Vermont school funding is decided by like town meeting day, like what the people kind of want, and is influenced a lot by taxes. So I think it's one of those things, if people are advocating for it, then it's more likely to happen. If they're not advocating for it, it's less likely to happen. Mr. Miller.
Just with some of the trends you've shown in like a pretty short period of time, and going to your point about town meeting day, school funding can be a pretty contentious item at town meeting day, some places, and I guess I just wanted to know, in your opinion, what's the best way to kind of get this information out to people in a way where they would be exposed to it and able to digest it, knowing that not everyone has a kid in school?
The presentation I gave today was kind of for a very specific group of people, and I know that not everyone here today can relate to anything that I talked about or can understand it because they don't have kids or, they don't care. And I think just kind of like some of those fast facts, I don't, in my opinion, just like those fast facts, not to like scare people, but just to be like, hey, this is really concerning. We're losing money for these programs, and there's a lot of issues that are occurring, and students need help. I think would be the best way to kind of approach that. Mr. Chandler.
Yes, I'm just curious if doing this study sort of changed your lens when you're sitting in the classrooms here at VA, and what's kind of behavior management are you seeing in different places around campus?
I don't know, for me, like right now, I'm in all these senior classes, and I know senioritis is happening with all of us, and a lot of teachers kind of were just like, all right, we're winding down, as long as you're getting your work in, that's fine, but I can say like, when I was like a freshman and kind of just like the acting out and those attention-seeking behaviors, a lot of the time, they were either just straight up ignored, or like it would, like a teacher would respond to that in a, like, hey, like in a way that would kind of like reinforce that behavior, as I previously mentioned, by giving attention to it. Yeah. Dr. Zakar?
Yeah, I often am sad about the divide sometimes between private independent schools and public schools, and I'm just wondering, we like to think that we are practicing as much as we can, and we know a restorative justice model with our discipline system. I'm wondering if you think that there are ways that even our school could come together with public school, and teachers could share information, students could, could we draw together a little bit more on some of these issues and other things, and we can sort of not think about a separation when we're really all after the same thing, the same goals.
I think part of that is, independent school teachers kind of doing their research, and like if they have questions, reaching out, because I know like a lot of public schools, they're facing a lot of these issues, and they have that community of public school, and they're able to talk freely with each other. So I think the responsibility kind of falls on those independent schools to, educate themselves, and if they have questions, kind of reach out to those communities and try to bridge that gap. Any other questions? Darlene.
During your research, did you see any sort of like bridges between individualized interventions versus group interventions, or like a potential sort of mix of the two that would say sports, if that would be more effective than just pulling a child out of class and having an individualized or a group intervention with them, and activities that could kind of help them without it feeling like they're getting helped, so it doesn't feel like they're, especially with kids.
I didn't find anything about that, but just like through kind of what I learned from my research, I would assume that oftentimes like the positive reinforcement in the classroom and in sports and just like in smaller groups would do a lot to help a student feel better that way. Anything else?
What was your first project idea?
Oh, my first project idea was I wanted to look into the way we experience emotions and kind of like the physical manifestation and how we respond to that. And that was really difficult to study. So. Okay. Thank you. For our last presentation, we have Antisha, and I believe we'll be taking a short break before her presentation. Thank you.
No, never. Well, they hire, okay? There is any way of how you do? Oh, yes.
She said that you do. We're all in the same chat room.
Oh, Victorio. Why? Is that what they do?
You don't probably are, yes.
Yeah, that's true. And it's gonna wear out before the winter, you know.
But you can pick it up
Yeah.
and be on the list.
Yeah.
That's gonna be for your car. Okay, bye.
Yeah, when she was talking about that, I was thinking about when I did the leadership
I didn't know that either.
and I also 7 minutes of wait. Yeah. And that's exactly what happened. That's exactly what happened. He came through the door and said, and then he put him on HR, and he said he was solved. So, he's on the list. If you wait again, he'll call it sick. But I don't think he
Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you so much for coming to my capstone. I know my parents are watching online, so hi. This is my capstone of my comparative analysis of COVID-19 and Ebola in developed Western and developing East African countries. So imagine with me two deadly viruses, one that shook the world and paused entire economies, and another more deadly that ravaged communities but is largely unknown by the global spotlight. Why did one provoke a global standstill while the other remained a distant tragedy? Those two are COVID-19 and Ebola. But first, a little background into my internship. This all started at the Uganda Virus Research Institute in Entebbe, Uganda. And I had an internship at the In Vitro Studies of Natural Therapeutics, led by Dr. Jackie Josimari, right there. And in vitro is basically the research of natural therapeutics, typically using isolated cells or cultures or biological molecules. The type of lab that they work with is category 3 lab, and they're very highly contaminated and used for research on highly infectious organisms such as SARS-CoV-2, which is COVID-19's actual name. And I got to see how research in the medical field is done, and I worked 9 to 4 every single day learning about each of these viruses 5 times a week. And did a few presentations and got to see what being a doctor on the PhD side would be like. So in recent years, the world has been faced with several devastating viral outbreaks, among them COVID-19 and Ebola, due to the global and regional impacts. Although both viruses caused significant health crises, their biological characteristics and societal responses have diverged greatly. Today, we explore how they were battled on very two different fronts: developed Western nations and developing East African nations. What does this tell us? Not just about disease, but about inequality, resilience, and the way the world responds to crises. This capstone explores and compares the virology, structure, treatments, and social impacts of both of these viruses, particularly examining how each of these nations have diverged greatly in their epidemics. I focus on Uganda in East Africa and the US as a Western nation. In Western societies, there will be more focus on topics due to the overall population being affected. Therefore, it would be classified as a pandemic, as it impacts on a global scale. And considering they have very different resources in East African countries, certain viruses may become neglected tropical diseases, which are illnesses that are prevalent to tropical and subtropical areas. So virology of each of these viruses. First of all, viruses are categorized in biosafety levels. A biosafety level is the application of safety precautions that reduce a lab technician's risk of infection and potentially to infectious material and limit contamination of the work environment and ultimately the community, according to the CDC. So, biosafety level 1 is not consistently known to cause disease and has very minimal potential hazard. An example of this is school labs, and an example of a disease of this is influenza. Biosafety level 2 have moderate potential hazard, and they cause mild diseases in humans. An example of this is salmonella. Biosafety level 3, the microbes are indigenous or exotic, and this is where we categorize COVID-19. It is potentially lethal, but there's a successful vaccine which reduced it from biosafety level 4, which Ebola is currently at, whereas there's no successful vaccine yet, and research is still being done very heavily. More exotic and virulent viruses are treated using mostly vaccines, which are substances used to stimulate immunity to a particular infectious disease or pathogen. So into each of them, COVID is at biosafety level 4, as I mentioned earlier, and the way it evolved and adapted was through mutation, which is a change in the DNA sequence of an organism. It causes organ damage affecting the kidneys, the heart, the lungs, and the brain, and inflammation and problems with the immune system. Its 4 prominent stages are alpha, beta, delta, and the most recent is Omicron. And a strain is basically a new, more aggressive and highly transmissible version of the virus compared to the original strain. For Ebola, it's categorized as biosafety level 4, whereas it's high risk of aerosol transmitted disease through droplets. And it's a hemorrhagic fever, which basically means that it causes internal or external bleeding. And its structure is like a filovirus, which is kind of like a threadish type of treatment. So think of like a ringworm kind of. And it basically enters the virus enters the host cells through the lysosome, where it fuses its membrane with the lysosome to release RNA into the cytoplasm, which is the structure of the cell. And it's a zoonotic disease, whereas monkeys are the reservoir hosts, then transmitting the virus into human beings, and that's how it's passed around. Another way it's transmitted is also through cattle, and yeah. So compared virology is COVID is transmitted via respiratory droplets when an infected person coughs, sneezes, etc. And then Ebola is human-to-human transmission and happens through direct contact of bodily fluids, so blood, saliva, vomit, etc. And the threat levels are different because Ebola is at biosafety level 4 and COVID-19 is at biosafety level 3. So, COVID treatments. The most common ones so far are antiviral medications, and so far remdesivir has shown efficacy in reducing the symptoms, and it's given either using IV, which is intravenously through a needle, or orally through the mouth, and it targets specific parts of the virus to stop multiplication in the body once one is infected. Another way is pre-exposure prophylaxis, which is a preventative monoclonal antibody for people severely or moderately immunocompromised. It's usually given to those who are of 12 or older at 88 pounds in addition to a vaccine, and then obviously additional treatment over IV by PEMGARDA, which is the type of intravenous monoclonal antibody. And a monoclonal antibody is a lab-made protein that mimics the body's natural antibodies. Like those listed there, I've tried to name them, but no. And they bind to the spike protein and stop the cell from being infected. And then the most popular ones are vaccines, obviously. We had Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, and as COVID was kept on mutating, some of them worked, some of them didn't. And some caused blood clotting, some had other symptoms as well, but those are the 3 that have been pivotal in reducing infection rates and disease outcomes. For Ebola, we have the most common monoclonal antibodies and IV treatments so far, and the 2 that are successful are Enmazeb and Ibanga. And for the IV treatments, it just basically helps maintain hydration because of all of the hemorrhaging, which is bleeding, that happens when trying to combat the virus, and they add on supportive measures of oxygen therapy and medication to manage symptoms. So far, the only vaccine that has shown some sort of change is Avebo, which was approved in December of 2019 for the Zaire species. So that's one of 6 species of Ebola virus. And it's a live attenuated vaccine, whereas it's a pre-exposure for those who work in the healthcare sector, so those who are lab technicians, outbreak responders, health professionals, and it's given intravenously to prevent the disease. So in comparison, there are obviously fewer pharmaceutical grade antivirus for Ebola compared to COVID-19, but both of them rely mostly on monoclonal antibodies. And Ebola uses a live attenuated vaccine, which is a form of the disease itself, so in this case the Zaire species, and they put it into the body so that the cells are more aware of what it would come in and look like, so they're able to combat it. And for COVID-19, it's an mRNA vaccine, whereas the cell gives instructions on how to manufacture the S protein found on the surface of the COVID virus after the body's muscle cells then start producing those antibodies to combat the virus. And then in comparison, in price, Ebola treatment is $1,464 on average to treat, which obviously most people cannot afford. And COVID-19 on average was $263.55. Due to the vast majority of research done on COVID-19 compared to Ebola, so there's more options on what people could choose. And people are able to do staying at home and learning how to do their own remedies to alleviate the process of COVID. I know, for example, for COVID, back at home, our president was showing workout videos and telling us to eat cassava to reduce COVID. And they made this little remedy called COVIDX, which high-key works. But yeah, you guys should have tried it. That's what I mean, more exposure to labs back home and doctors back home and traditional medicine doctors. So yeah. So the societal responses for COVID, for instance, the US and European nations implemented large-scale testing and vaccination campaigns for COVID, leveraging sophisticated healthcare systems to mitigate the spread of the virus. And the US, for instance, had screening at airports and self-quarantines and isolations. The response to COVID was also highly influenced by the varying levels of health infrastructure across the continent, with some countries facing very severe difficulties in implementing these structures and comprehensive testing and vaccine strategies. I know, for instance, the Uganda response strategy was risk communication, testing, contact tracing at district and community levels, and implementing physical and social distancing, as well as face masks when people decided they wanted to wear them. For Ebola, community engagement and local knowledge are pivotal in managing these outbreaks because there's not very many resources. For instance, during the Ebola outbreaks in East Africa, local communities played a crucial role in ensuring that certain measures were taken. I know, for instance, considering that cattle were also very infected by this, for Ebola, the rate went very up because in rural areas in Uganda, when they go into contact and they don't know what these things are, they'll go into contacts directly without having known what these things entirely do. And so it creates this mass kind of how COVID was, this mass, I don't know what the word is, I'm not finding the word, but yeah. For Western countries, due to their advanced healthcare infrastructure, they generally exhibited robust responses to viral outbreaks compared to countries back home. And the availability of cutting-edge technology and extensive resources from the bigger organizations allowed for rapid testing, widespread vaccination programs, and comprehensive public health policies. In many East African countries, healthcare infrastructure faces significant challenges, including limited resources and lower access to advanced medical technology, complicating the rapid response to especially Ebola epidemics. And I think that Western countries are well equipped and prepared to manage these outbreaks, because if we were more prepared, I feel like they wouldn't have gone as far as they have right now. So to conclude, it's more expensive to treat Ebola and there's less intervention and resources allocated towards furthering the research. It's far more deadly than COVID-19 is. And for now, spreading is less transmissible because not everyone is around these reservoir hosts or the monkeys or in contact with infected bodily fluids. And right now, at least, technology is far more widespread now, so that people are able to come in contact with these things and know exactly what to do when it comes to their community. COVID is less expensive as it was a global pandemic, especially affecting first world countries. And mutation obviously allowed it to travel over continents and jump to other countries. And spreading was contained through heavy research and intervention from larger health organizations and countries. Things we can learn from this is that Western countries are putting themselves at risk, not properly investigating these viruses, because COVID also started as a very small thing and just rapidly came into existence. And Ebola has been around for hundreds of thousands of years, and who knows that it will not mutate again and jump to other countries across the ocean. So, thank you very much. Questions? Maya?
I'm curious what, so obviously there's research being done on Ebola. I'm curious how much and how fast of an impact do you think will happen if more westernized countries, like the US, start researching Ebola and ways to prevent it? Like how fast?
I think actually going into these communities and where I did my internship at the Uganda Virus Research Institute, the doctors are well learned, they've gotten all of their degrees from out here and gone back to try and further the research done. So I think just stepping in and funding and actually going and talking to doctors and learning exactly what they need to further their research, because it's all done. They just need the platform to be able to put their research out there. Yeah. Mr. Miller?
At the Virology Institute you worked at this summer, what kind of procedures did you have to go through just to protect yourself?
So they told me I wasn't able to go directly into the category 3 and 4 labs just because legal things, and it's just not allowed. I had to do a 6-month training in order to enter. But they take very, I don't know if I put a picture of it up, but they take very cautious measures. They wear different gowns, different shoes that they leave inside, and there's fingerprint scanning to enter the lab. So it's a very, very well-funded lab. So I wasn't able to get inside there, but I was able to see from the glass looking in. Yeah. Yes.
And Tisha, in the U.S., there was a not insignificant backlash to the COVID-19 response. And, there's a portion of the population that believes that the vaccines and interventions perhaps caused more harm than they did in preventing the spread of the virus. I'm curious if you saw any comparable level of distrust or, not a willingness to not believe in the efficacy of interventions towards Ebola in East Africa at large or Uganda specifically.
So you're asking if people have listened?
Sort of, or if they have decided that the experts perhaps do not have people's welfare at the center of what they're offering for interventions.
I think so far it's really prominent in rural areas in Uganda, so it's not really in the city, quite a right now. But I know that they've sent lots of healthcare workers into these rural areas to be permanently positioned there in order to make sure that people are somehow treated. So like with the monoclonal antibodies or like the IV treatment. I don't know how far the vaccine is yet. They didn't really, they're also very secretive, they like to gatekeep. But they told me that they're working really hard on some different things because they get people who do like natural things in labs and then they come in and they send their things to the institute to be studied. So in the institute there's many kind of sections and like each does their own thing. So there's one for malaria, there's one for Ebola, COVID, HIV, AIDS. Like they found that institute found a cure for HIV, AIDS. So they really do work hard. Darlene.
First of all, did really well.
Thank you.
But my question is, do you think the demographic of people affected by Ebola? Because if you look at in Uganda, the people mostly affected by the spread of Ebola were from very rural areas, and every time there's a resurgence of Ebola, it never touches. Like for me, I can take myself, my family and I have never experienced anything related to Ebola, but you hear about it almost every month. That there's an outbreak in Nigeria, there's an outbreak here, and do you think that's kind of like why it just stays in those communities? And then my second question is.
That's how we do it. Okay, so you asked. Let's repeat your question. I'm sorry.
Okay. I just asked if the communities affects its spread, like because it's less like in town, less in Kampala, more like in the north and stuff. Yeah. If like class affects the spread of the vaccine.
Very much so. I think there's like a demographic of like kind of like the 2% or like 1% of Ugandans are able to like have a comfortable life. So like I feel like in those areas like the northern part of Uganda and whatnot, I feel like they're already struggling with so many other things. So they're just trying to keep themselves afloat, you know? So I think that I know especially what the Virus Institute is working on, they send teams to go to those areas to try and alleviate the spread into other parts of Uganda. So that's all I can answer, to be honest.
My second question is, how do you think we can bridge the mistrust Africans have with the Western world? Because during COVID there was an incident of them sending Uganda vaccines, and then it turned out that there was water in their vaccine. This is really not funny. That they sent fake vaccines that were paid for by our government to our country, and there's been continued instances like this with where the West promises things to African society, especially in healthcare, and even like now with US aid being taken away, we have people dying of HIV because they're completely reliant. Do you think it's more efficient for our countries to just build systems where we can do those things for ourselves, or do you think there's a way or some other way to like bridge that gap between like what's being done to help everyone?
I think we have to be the ones at this point because you know how our president is, and resources didn't go to what they needed to go to, unfortunately. So I think that I think it has to come from our generation because, again, unfortunately, it's like a way where I'm gonna trust what someone who is from my area is gonna say over someone who's from the outside looking in. So I think that what we need to do is actually get people to fund our projects and actually give a platform to scientists and people who are doing this research to properly do their research without any limitations, because money should not be a factor into someone's well-being, to be honest. And also just the prices are ridiculous because people cannot afford $1,400 to get a vaccine to keep themselves and their families safe. So there needs to be some kind of program set in place that people are able to get healthcare for free or like at a very minimal cost. So, yeah. Mr. Chavez?
What's the, sorry.
No, we always do that.
Is there an a pharmaceutical industry in Africa that can actually produce things? Or is that, do you still rely on Western companies to do that?
I know of recent, there's very several that have popped up, especially I know that a doctor recently who has a pharmaceutical company back at home, he found a cure for cancer that's actually approved by the US, so it actually works. And not very many people know about that, so I think it's back down to the platform, because once people from outside see such research taking place and such crazy things happening, I think it will attract more people to come in. So don't be surprised if Uganda's up there later in the year. So yeah.
Do you plan to study some of these things in college, or what is your next path in college?
I was heavily thinking medicine and research, but I'm high-key leaning more towards research right now, because I just think it just creates, to me personally, it just creates more of an impact, because I'm actually involved in a kind of change rather than be, again, from the outside looking in or just giving money blindly, rather be the actual person who's creating change in my country. So, yeah. Any others? Maya?
Are you going to, or have you, and are you going to continue working with are you going to continue your internship, or like maybe?
Yes, for sure. I actually really bonded with the doctor. Everyone was very shocked because they're all like walking on eggshells around her. But I was like, she's just a girl. But yeah, she's very friendly and she's always like, just let us know if you come across any projects that we can help out with. Like, we're always open. So she's very friendly and she came to school here, so she understands how the field out here is as well. So yeah, definitely I will be working with them in the future. Any other? Darlene?
What would you, in your opinion, because you've obviously been from Uganda and Kenya, and you've seen what the hospitals look like, and we know that the average Ugandan survives off $1 every day. So what difference would you want to see in our healthcare system, whether like outside of the allocation of funds and corruption, that would make the biggest impact, and how do you plan to get there?
I think it just comes down to our leadership. Like, just a brief background so you can understand. The Ugandan president has been there since my mom was 2 years old. So my mom has seen him. My mom's mom has seen him. My mom's grandmother has seen him. Like, so it gets to a point where it's the same regime over and over and over again, to the point where he doesn't know what change looks like. Like, Ugandans don't know what change looks like. So it just takes one person to be the person to be like, no, I'm not standing for this anymore. And hopefully it's one of us, because it's getting to a point where it's sad, because Uganda has so much potential, because there's so many smart and sharp minds just wasting away with nothing to do, but yet they have so much knowledge to bring to the world and so many, things to yet discover. So I think that it just comes down to the leadership, because that's how you get change done. And, allocation of funds into research and actually helping the people of Uganda rather than going into the pockets is what is actually going to bring change to us. So yeah. Any others? Okay, I'm done. Thank you.
Congratulations to all of our presenters. project that they undergo with their own passions, energies, and planning. I want to acknowledge Jenna Koch, my colleague, and the guidance that we gave them, but also some people in the room. Since Ms. Koch and I are not science majors, we had a great deal of support given to our students from Jake Miller, Joe Achanis, Christine Armiger, and also so many other people in the room I know who have collectively mentored our students through this great year. I hope that students here who are not seniors think about doing the Capstone project in the future. It's a great signature program for Vermont Academy. It's wonderful to have had you here as an audience, and thank you for the lively questions and engagement. Have a good night.